Our webinar, it's recording. Hello and welcome to WERA's Hot Topic. This is our remote learning panel series, the 5th installment. We're talking today about remote administration of the Smarter Balanced Interim Assessment. And this is brought to you from WERA, the Washington Educational Research Association. You see our mission there on this slide. And Brian, if you'd advance to the next one, I want to just talk a little bit about how we're working this year. Many of you know, recognize many names as longstanding members of WERA. We are recognized as a forum for educators and scholars who have a passion for applying what we learn through educational research. And many of you know, for about 35 years, we have partnered with OSPI to host an annual conference in December at the Seattle Airport Hilton. Conditions being what they are, it's not safe or even possible right now for us to meet. So our shift this year has been to virtual meetings and webinars and presentations. And this is one of them. So we are so appreciative of you joining us and being able to participate in this forum. We've found lots of success in the format, and we have good plans for some things coming up. We have a few items that Brian will let you. Brian, do we have the dyslexia? I'm sorry, the dyslexia hot topic? Oh, perfect. So coming up next, November 17th, you know that we have the requirement across the state by fall of 21 for all of us to have an early literacy screener for dyslexia in place. And we're going to be kicking off some information on that as well. So I'm going to shift it on over to our host, Mr. Brian Gable from Clover Park, and take it over from there, Brian.
Great, thanks, Brian. This is kind of the Brian show right now, but soon we're going to turn it over to Antone. But first, in addition to that dyslexia screener hot topic, we also have tentatively planned for Tuesday, December 1st from 1 to 2:20, a topic on remote map testing. So this is not just how to do it, but lessons learned. So Brian, Rick, and I, and possibly a few others may join us as well, as are some of our test coordinators, to talk about how remote testing went for MAP in our district. We're going to talk about the tips to have a smoother administration, some critical communication strategies that cannot be ignored, and then we're going to do the fun data analysis. How do the results from this fall compare to results from last fall? Which grades had inflated scores? Which subjects? Where was growth after we cleaned the data up? What areas did students grow the most in? What did they actually grow the least in? We're going to talk about that. So it's sure to be interesting. Now, we are WERA, you are WERA. So if you have your own experiences to share, if you've done this and you'd like to join us, we would love to have your brain on the panel. So feel free to shoot me an email and we'll chat about it. Okay, so without further ado, I want to introduce our special guest, Antone Jackson from OSPI, somebody we all know and love. Whenever you have an assessment question, you go to Antone. So we had assessment questions, remote assessment questions, we went to Antone. He was super quick to say, yeah, man, I'll help. He is amazing, and he's going to give a presentation about 15 minutes, and then we're going to go into some question and answers. Now, I want all of you to know that you guys are part of this discussion. So after his presentation, there'll be a few questions that we're going to go over. But if you have questions during the presentation, during his addressing of a question that we've given him, type it in the Q&A box. Don't type it in the chat box because we're probably only going to be monitoring one of them, Q&A. And we will get that question asked, and Antone will answer it the best he can. Also, if you have ideas that you'd like to share with OSPI, so you don't have a question, you have an idea, you can type that in the Q&A box too, because all of that is going to be shared with the OSPI team so that they can digest some of your concerns and ideas going into this year. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, turn it over to Antone. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you, Brian, for the opportunity to share some information, just some thoughts around interim administration here in this time of remote instruction. So appreciate that opportunity. I want to say that I had an opportunity to coordinate with other staff at the agency, specifically there are two staff within the assessment development office, Serena O'Neill, who works with the mathematics assessment, and Maya Wilson, who works with the English language arts assessment. And then also our colleagues in the learning and teaching department, Arlene Crum, Jennifer Cronquist in the math department, and Era Jackson and Molly Berger in the English language arts department. So I wanted to thank them for contributing to this information in terms of some of our thoughts around interim assessments and the roles that they might play here at the start of this school year. So I'm going to share here the presentation. All right. Are you seeing the administration of the SBA interim assessments? First slide.
Looks good.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Right. So just wanted to start off with just a reminder of our vision, mission, and values at OSPI, and that we're always striving toward ensuring that all students are prepared. And I think especially now in this time of remote instruction, there's a lot of considerations in ensuring that students have the opportunities to be prepared and that they have the access to instruction. The mission around transforming education, I think there's been a lot of work done to transform from a face-to-face instruction model to some remote or hybrid model. So really appreciate that, and with the focus and our values of ensuring equity and focusing on continuous improvement and whole child work. More specifically around equity, just wanting to ensure that there is a focus on educational equity and providing opportunities for all students. How do we get to reach all students from a variety of different backgrounds? How do we attend to the individual needs that those students have in terms of accessing and learning in especially this time when they are physically disconnected often from the teachers with whom they would normally make very strong personal connections in a face-to-face environment. And then when you get into, I think, what was the very first question that kind of prompted a lot of this question around, are the interims available to administer? So there was this question that came up, and just getting the information out there and saying, yes, they are available to administer. It can be done traditionally if there's hybrid learning or any face-to-face learning. They can be done face-to-face. They are available, and they can be administered remotely. Supportive Balance 2 is the holder of this resource. Has made them available as they did in the spring when school facilities were closed and remote instruction really began. They decided to extend the availability through this full school year. So interims will be available to administer, including remotely, throughout the entire school year. We and our vendor Cambium worked to basically stand up the interims as we do at the beginning of every year in September. So in the end of September, the interims were made available, and for administration and the reporting system was ready to go to be able to start presenting interim results. And all of this is done without the need to install the secure browser. Because in the past, if you're going to administer an interim in a face-to-face, in a kind of a standardized way, you would need the secure browser. That would be something that would be installed on the school computers. But Cambium has a solution that doesn't require a student installing a secure browser on their home computer or family computer. They can use just a web browser. And this also, we'll talk a little bit about how this might facilitate some supports that you provide to students as if they are going to take an interim remotely. We'll say that the interims at this time, if you want to administer them in a standardized way, one that will result in student scores or student information within a reporting system, it does require a synchronous use, meaning the teacher and the student are on, or the TA and the student are on at the same time. And as in past years, just want to reinforce that the decisions on which interims to use and when, and how, what's the educational uses that you have for these interims. All of these are decisions that are made at the local level. There's a lot of variety and options and flexibility in the ways that interim questions can be used. I want to just reinforce those, because I think this was the biggest question in terms of, is it even available? And the answer is yes, absolutely. So moving on from there, I want to talk a little bit about the focus and the purpose and some of the message that we have, that how this kind of blends in with other messaging that has come from the agency around the focus of learning at the beginning of this school year. And really want to continue to emphasize this focus on instruction and instruction aligned to the standards. This is one of those things where we know that instructional time is very valuable, and especially in a remote setting, how do you engage students in that instructional time is a critical consideration for local educators. So that focus, we want to make sure that that is maintained. And to that end, if we think about if we want to focus instruction on what's going on with the standards, the question in some part around the interims becomes, how are we getting information from the interims if they're given to students and we're using it as a tool to gather information from students? How are we getting those into the hands of the classroom teacher? And I know that this is a consideration that's been going on since the interims became first available. This is not unique to a remote or a hybrid instructional model, but this is something that how are we getting this into? So I know a lot of the questions, a lot of the things that people are thinking about now are logistical and technical, and just how are we going to get interims out to kids and how are they going to engage with that? I think an important question to include in that conversation is, how are we going to get information back to the teacher who can then make, and I'm going to use the word classroom here throughout this presentation to mean a variety of different interactions between the student and the teacher. And that can be synchronous, asynchronous, could be face-to-face, but in many cases is going to be remote. So that classroom is kind of a flexible term. Because really what we want to be able to have happen is the educator is able to go through beyond just an overall score. We know that the interims will produce results on a scale of below standard, at or near standard, and above standard. And that information can be valuable in some cases for educators, but there's a lot more that can be unpacked and a lot more information that an educator could get from student results. And then the question is, how are they going to get access to that, and how are they going to share that potentially with students, so that students can start thinking about and be self-reflective on their own learning, is what's the direction that they need to go if this is a tool that's used to help monitor the knowledge and the skills where students are in their learning at any particular point in time. I did mention a few slides back about the flexibility. I do want to emphasize that interim usage is not limited to just a standardized administration. And when I say standardized, that's basically a TA has set up a session ID, the student is working independently on answering questions. If there's any interaction between the teacher and the student, it's more kind of a support. How do I navigate from one item to the next, or I'm having a technical issue. How do I get to information that can help the student answer a particular question? Similar ways that a student and an educator, a TA, might interact during the summative assessment. Interims can be used beyond that standardized administration. And so just have a few non-standardized uses. of either interims as a whole, or more specifically, specific interim questions that educators can use to help kind of embed in instructional practice, get some information without having to, say, take away from instructional time, but can use items, so use questions in the interims to help unpack and gather information for making those classroom decisions for when working with students. So, for example, one of the things that educators have access to is an assessment viewing application. And educators can share an interim item through a remote, like a Zoom meeting or a Google Classroom. They can pull up, the educator can log in and pull up the assessment viewing application, pick an item that is connected to an instructional lesson or unit that they're working on, because you can review those items at any time. All of the interims view those at any time. And work with students on those and show those questions to students to help them kind of either unpack their thinking, to help work through a particular type of problem, or to, one of the things that the interims do very, very well is they show kind of the ways that students may be asked to demonstrate some of their thinking or learning on a summative assessment. So students have an opportunity to see, oh, this is how they're going to ask a particular question, and even just dive into that. It says when they word a question, when a question is worded in a particular way, what is it that we're trying to that they're trying to elicit from the student in terms of learning? What is the question really meaning? So they can unpack those and have conversations and use them as a dialogue in small groups or whole class or whatnot. And again, this is something that can be done in face-to-face instruction as well, but may work very well in remote instruction, because then the student doesn't have to log in. They don't have to sit and take the interim independently. There can be this interaction that can help provide that really critical information back to the teacher in an instructionally important way. Another thing that can be done, that fourth bullet there, is looking at the rubrics and the scoring materials for open-ended items. So some of those short constructed response items on, say, a math performance task or the English language arts full write, taking a look at those and saying, well, what is the assessment? What's the summative assessment looking for in particular aspects of a student's response to particular questions? So that's something that can help, again, students and educators get more familiar with what are the expectations of the summative assessment. The interim assessments serve that purpose very, very well. And many of you are familiar with this term about non-standardized. And as we have moved to a new reporting system this year, we've kind of renamed that non-standardized description as in what we call classroom use. So how do we get to, it's just a different name for saying, if you've got information that isn't of a standardized nature, that is much more kind of relies on the classroom educator's interpretation, because they know how the interims were engaged with by students. That's important that those that any information that's generated is used for classroom use only. Now, as I mentioned a few, just want to highlight again in more succinct ways some of the benefits here. I mentioned that the interims are very good at showing ways that a particular skill and standards can be assessed, but I do want to say that there is that is one way that standards can be assessed, and there are multiple ways. But the interims do show, here's a way that a student might see a question on the summative assessment. And it also helps students, especially for some of maybe some of the novel item types beyond multiple choice, beyond just a short answer. It can help students understand how do they take what they've learned and transfer it into a particular type of question. So they can get practice with doing online transfer of skills into an online testing environment. Because ultimately we don't want the students, let me put it this way, we do want the students to be familiar enough with the testing platform that does not prevent any barrier to them really demonstrating what they know they can do. And as I said, interim information provided into the hands of the classroom teacher can provide one piece in a picture of student learning. We'll say that this phrase I think we've heard quite a bit. Multiple measures is an important aspect of instruction. So that being said, I do want to just mention briefly some considerations that we have around uses of interims and administering them remotely. I do want to say that, you know, we talked about the focus of instruction should be aligned to the standards. The interims are also aligned to the standards, but that instruction should not be dictated by interims or interim items or the ways that interim questions ask students to respond, to demonstrate particular skills, because not everything in the standards is assessed in the interim. And an interim can give a very good picture of a small piece of the skills, especially individual items have to focus on a very small piece of skills described in the standards. So there's a lot of other information that would be important for educators to know about student learning for the standards. And then this final one about, I said, their interims show one way. They do only show some ways. So there's a lot more flexibility that can be done in other ways of measuring student learning toward the standards that are not captured within an interim assessment. Some of the things to think about as you're thinking about administering interims, if that's remotely or using interims, interim questions in a non-standardized way, is just thinking about how have interims been used in previous years. Do you still have those uses based on the design and the intent of the interims? Do they fit into a remote administration situation? Do you have those same conditions that you may have experienced previous years that said, hey, an interim was a good way to gather information about students? Is that really going to fit with gathering information about student learning in this in the experiences that you've had with remote instruction? And then how are classroom educators going to get that information to inform their instruction? What's the mechanism that's going to be used? Because ultimately that's where we want that information to get. The conditions that are set up within the school in the district, there are some that might lend themselves better to doing remote instruction. What's the model that's being used? Some of those might also be well suited for remote assessments. And so I think that, for example, the MAP testing webinar that's coming up later, that, you know, learning some lessons from that and saying, you know, what are some models that work well? What are some things that can help support if you choose to go in that direction, remote administration for interim assessment. And then just the final things, just as a reminder, that the interims are not designed for any accountability purposes. I know that there's, in the past, you might have used them for a variety of different purposes, but really the intent and the value of the interims is really if you get information into the classroom teacher in the hands, and they can make instructional decisions with the students with whom they're working with right now. That's really where we see the greatest benefit of interims. And then finally, just some security considerations. This kind of came up the first time, when we were first talking about allowing use of interims remotely in the spring, is what about security? Unlike the summative assessment, these are not completely secure. We say there's interims and interim questions are semi-secure, which means the phrase that we've used are student and teacher facing. So if you are going to administer an interim remotely or work with students remotely on interims, just consider what are the kind of the expectations that need to be set with teachers and students and families in terms of maintaining that security, kind of keeping it the educational, I'm going to use the word again, classroom environment in which the students and the teachers are interacting. And the idea, I think one question came up around, can we print out the interim as packets. I think there's a security concern there with printing packets and sending them home. And likewise, I think we have, so that doesn't change. That hasn't changed from kind of face-to-face interaction, as well as we ask that you don't post interim questions publicly because of that semi-secure nature. We not want other educators to be able to use interims in a variety of ways. Right. There is another document that I wanted to kind of unpack a little bit and just go over briefly in terms of its organization. And this is a document that has been posted in WAMs for district assessment coordinators. And we posted it there so that they can help facilitate conversations at the district level and at school levels as well about, what are the reasons or what are the ways that we might administer an interim assessment. So I'm going to just kind of I'm going to back out of here of this PowerPoint and open up that particular document. Are you able to see that considerations and guide for remote administration?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So try to keep it relatively brief. It's 8 pages, split kind of equally between just some thoughts and ideas, things to have conversations about at the local level that we think are important in terms of making decisions about how to use interims and whether or not to administer them remotely. This is very similar to documentation that we provided in the spring. So if you saw that, this is basically a facelift on that particular document, but this is thinking about this this school year. And as I mentioned before, one of the main considerations is just thinking about how does use of interims align with other guidance that has come out of OSPI in terms of the focus on instruction, the focus on things like social emotional learning, and re-engaging students with the classroom in a remote way. That we think is a primary focus at the beginning of the school year. And just thinking about how do we think about instruction for instruction's sake and that for learning's sake, and how does the use of the interims kind of fit in with that? And that's a decision again, making at the local level. So, and these are just kind of things to be thinking about. There's a big component of equity here is how are we engaging students with remote instruction in general is likely going to determine how well they would be able to engage with a remote interim assessment. So thinking about how our students engage in is that the highest priority that we want to make sure that we're able to reach students in the various situations in which they're working from home. I mentioned security. So there are considerations around security for interims. And then administration, as I mentioned, we've got some things to think about, like the synchronous, the need for some kind of synchronous work between an educator and a student so that they're able to provide supports to the students as they need them as they're going through an interim assessment. And then I mentioned, then we include some alternate uses of interim items as I described on the slide. So I just kind of pulled a little bit of that from that document and saying that there are also some publicly available resources such as the training test and the practice test that don't require, that don't have the security considerations, don't have the administration needs, that they can be used if you want to have some kind of a support for students. They are content specific, they're grade specific. You can look at those as additional supports. And after that introductory page, then the next part of the document goes into the specifics of and the logistics around if you do want to administer an interim assessment, here's how you could do that, again, without the need for a secure browser, without the need for a student to download that onto their home computer or family computer. So it's broken up into what the test administrator would do, which is very similar to past years, which is get in, start a test session, and then in some way provide the session ID to the students. So that's that's basically, that work has not changed. There are some guidelines, some things to think about as you are the TA in putting together this or setting up a test session for students. And then specific information about where do you go to set up that test session. Then there is a section on providing information to students and families. So how do you get the information that they need? And what are the directions that they're going to need? So for example, this is information you could provide to students and families. You could paraphrase, pick and choose, however you choose to communicate this with families. That process, I'm going to leave up to the kind of local structure, what works best for communicating with parents. But these are the steps that the student would need to take in order to take an interim assessment remotely without the need for the secure browser. As I said, we've got a couple different softwares that they would need. And then step by step, just says, here's what they would need to do: launch the browser, go to this website. So pictures along the way that they can use to guide the steps. So this basically says, hey, here's all the steps that the student would see, all of the pages that they would see as they're going through getting into the test, all the way down to, okay, you've got to the begin test now. You click begin test now. You're going to see interim questions appearing on your screen as they would if you were in school, and just any supports that might be needed could be provided by either test administrator or a classroom teacher. So I think those were the two main components, two main pieces that I wanted to share today for that aspect. Because Brian, I'm going to turn it back to you to help facilitate the next part of the.
Anton, thanks so much. Yes, I'm going to go ahead and kick it in with a few questions here. And attendees out there, I am seeing your questions pop up, and we will address those. So feel free again to type them into the Q&A area, and Anton will be here to talk about those. So thanks so much for that, Anton. It was nice to actually see your PowerPoint. I adjusted a few of my questions because you answered some of the things, but I've modified them a bit. So my first question is this. Many of the attendees out there are like me. They are in school districts that are seeking ways to assess their students while preserving the limited virtual instruction time that teachers spend with their students. It's huge. Basically, if teachers have to spend time proctoring, it's off the table because they just want to focus on their students. So the traditional method of administering the interims requires the teacher to use their contact time to administer the test. So they have to administer it synchronously. For example, teachers need to be physically present during the administration process in order to provide the session ID and then also manually click in the students. So in your presentation, you suggested using interims as part of a kind of classroom activity, which it seems like transforms the assessment into kind of like a group activity. I think that's cool. I think a lot of questions that can be done with. However, some interim questions may not be suitable for this. For example, those requiring students to read and digest longer reading passages, or spend time composing a response. Some students will do it faster than others. In this case, students participating in the interims kind of needs to be an assessment style format, and it may be preferred. So my question to you is, what are one or two ways, creative ways, that that teachers in schools can kind of emulate this assessment style format? Of course, it's low stakes, it's chill, but emulate it in a way that also preserves as much instructional time as possible. For example, could passages be shared somehow with students ahead of time so they can read them? So there's not this awkward silence as kids are reading or whatever. Anyway, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Yeah, I hadn't thought about preloading. You're right. In some of the English language arts interims, preloading those those passages for students. I guess the question is, what would say, how are educators engaging them with students with readings currently? With textbooks or other online. You're posting those probably to Google Classroom or something else that has a secure login. With the interims and the test security around those, we wouldn't want them posted somewhere where the public could see them. But yeah, posting them in the Google Classroom, even with a login, I'm not super excited about.
It's okay to say, hey, this is something I need to think about too. I mean, some of these questions are kind of, they're at the technical end. I'm a technical kind of person, so a lot of these questions are for me, but I'm trying to figure out kind of how does the rubber meet the road here? Like, how can we get this to work? Because as you've mentioned, these interim assessments are great tools. And the state has probably spent a lot of resources on on them and getting them available to us. We just want to use them. So
right.
It'd be nice to find some creative way to do it. So, but it's okay if the answer isn't immediately available right now.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Some of the ways to administer the interim involve a teacher. It's the classroom. It's that classroom focus, as you've talked about. One way that we administered MAP at some of the schools was to have one person be kind of a master proctor. They would start a session and they would kind of take care of that session and monitor it. Let kids in, get them in. If they get kicked out, they would get an email from a teacher who's kind of proctoring it, and they would get them back in. So it kind of lessened the burden of teachers with the administration of, of the test. So one idea that I was talking with somebody over at the Washington Help Desk was to have one person at a school maybe be in charge of a session and set it up, give the session ID, and just kind of monitor it, let kids in when they need to, because kids test at different times. What's convenient for one? What's a convenient time for one kid to test? Maybe a noisy time at a household for another kid. So students need to have kind of some flexibility as to when they test. Plus, mom or dad may not be around. Maybe at YMCA camp. So what do you think about that approach as far as, like, I call it a master proctor approach?
Yeah, that having a master proctor is definitely something that is technically possible. It's as long as the user is as a school or a district role in the same district or the school where the students are rostered and tied, then yes, they could start a session and monitor students as they come in. So technically, yes, that can work. And I'm sure there are places that use a similar approach during face-to-face administration, because then they better monitor. And I think that's likely one of the things that was used, possibly that's used quite frequently for summative assessments. So on the technical logistical way, yes, that's possible. And I think coming back to your previous question about that instructional time, it does free up the teacher in terms of they don't have to individually have to attend to that, but the student is still kind of taken away from instructional time to engage with the interim. And then the question is, again, how connected is that teacher to the information that comes out of the interim? If it's something that's done at the school level, is it because the school is saying, oh, we want all the teachers to do this for a school-based purpose, which really doesn't seem to promote getting that information back into the hands of the classroom teacher. But if that is something that is being asked, the classroom teacher saying, hey, can we have somebody who can just do that technical part, and then we go in and get that information, then yeah, that is entirely possible. Just some things to think about is, for example, if you have, let's say that you have all 6th graders take the same interim, and the TA goes in, one person goes in, and they set up an interim session with only one interim available. that's this, there's usually not a problem with that. Let's say you got two teachers, sixth grade, who want to do two different interims. Well, the TA is going to set up two interims when the student has a possibility of choosing the one you don't necessarily, the teacher doesn't want. So there's just a consideration of making sure that the students are selecting the right interim. But like, let's say you have one sixth grade, one fifth grade, one fourth grade. It's usually not a problem because the fourth grade students only going to see the fourth grade interim. The fifth grade students only going to see the fifth grade interim. So just thinking about which interims and when you want to set those up.
Yeah, you could have like a math interim day where you have one math interim for each grade, so that any student can log into the session and they're only going to see the one interim that the school wants them to do. And I'm on board with you on this. I feel like the teacher in the classroom, they need to be the ones that are invested in this. They need to be the ones understanding it, because that helps them understand how the students need to think and essentially kind of what we're expecting of the students.
Sure.
So,
but I think along those lines and kind of I think you kind of alluded to this inside of a master, you can have somebody with whom the teacher can coordinate. And so one teacher might test an interim, administer an interim one day, and then another teacher might go to that same master proctor another day and say, can you set up a session for me? The other thing to think about is, would that person be, I think you alluded to this, would that person be the one providing supports to the student, in which case, are they going to know, are they the best person to know what supports a student might need if they're taking an interim remotely? Or is that something that the teacher is going to know more about the individual student needs and situations to help them if the student does encounter any kind of issue?
Yeah. Speaking of supports, one of the things that has come up, like when students take a test, they usually get that. I mean, I can remember when I took tests, it was kind of that boring first 5 minutes where you got to listen to the instructions, right? But that's kind of like this part of the standardized component. But we sometimes don't speak of the interims, as you've mentioned, as standardized assessments. So that
Right.
It's more flexible about how we give them instructions. What's the best way to give them instructions if that's something that we do?
Right. And yeah, you don't have to be as specific. You don't have to go lockstep. There's not a TA script that has to be followed within for the administration of the interims. So you can be more flexible. You can be more attentive to, okay, go here, go this, work with the students to as they're, say, logging in, or as they have a question during an interim, you can engage with the student more so than you would on a summative assessment. Now, that being said, and I want to see if I can get this to everybody here. I'm gonna post a link in the chat to a document that we have posted. We had posted last year about that can be used as a support if you want to have a more standardized script that you want to follow, or at least something maybe even to flex on and say, here's here, we'll start with this, but we'll be flexible with individual students and just understanding that this does not have to be followed, but it's a resource that's available if you want it for supporting students as they are either getting into the interim assessment, as they are taking an interim assessment, things like helping them, understand if they get to the end of the test, what do they do, reviewing the answers to the questions, things like that. Just some of that, again, that in a lower stakes environment, helping them better understand the test delivery system. That's a powerful benefit of having them do an interim assessment.
Great. Thanks, Anton. So let's move on to the next question first. So some school districts have struggled with and are currently struggling with in this remote environment, getting all their students reliably connected to the internet so they can take part in any online testing or just online instruction. Over the last 3 years, a few districts have found a way to administer interims on paper. So they did this by essentially going to the AVA and kind of manually pulling out questions and putting them in the form of Microsoft Word documents. And they did them nicely and gave teachers the access to all of them. In your presentation, you addressed security considerations, and you asked that district schools not print interim packets and send them home to students. So does this mean that these interim snapshots that people worked really hard on to try to get into very nice Microsoft Word documents should not be used at all during this period? Or if you were a district that you're kind of sitting on this treasure trove of this, what could be an acceptable use for them right now? What could be a really good?
Yeah, you're right. And, the security thing considerations I think are there, but I think more so if you have paper interims and for students, different student needs, I think that a paper administration of an interim is very appropriate if the student has a need for that type of a mode. That's perfectly fine. So using those and using them within kind of the school building facility, there's less of an issue because the kid is not taking it and it's not being sent out to the individuals, the students, families' homes. So yeah, that's one aspect. But I think for me, a larger aspect is around, well, why would we want to give the packets to the students to do at home if that is something that is just an activity for them to do? It's just something for them to, okay, we know that they're aligned to standards. We know that this is a good resource. Okay, we're going to give this to the students in the packet, and they do the packet, but nothing comes back to the classroom teacher. No information is being pulled back to the teacher, i.e. they're not collecting back those packets. The benefit of providing information to that teacher isn't being realized.
Well, let's just assume though that the teacher has the packets and like, I really want students to do like a couple questions on this. That was the assumption here. So it's still classroom centered.
Sure. Yeah, and they can get that information back. So I think it really is that intent of the interims to be able to inform the classroom teacher and saying, we don't just the mechanism to be able to gather those back, primarily for a getting information back to that teacher. Secondarily, also for the security of those items not getting out onto, say, social media or other places. Kids taking pictures of them and whatnot. You could set up expectations with students and families. I think that's something that can be decided. But
so you're saying that it is possible to use some of these resources in a way where you could email them to students. I just want to be clear on that.
I think once we're getting out, and this is that very it's a sticky place to say. Once they leave that building, once that physical paper leaves that building in which it was, being housed securely otherwise, there are just so many considerations. We're not recommending that be done.
Got it. So it's not recommended to email.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Fine. All right. So let's go back to a school that wants to try to administer these interims on the testing platform. Students, in order to log in, got to have their SSIDs. Now, we've all of us in this audience know that SSIDs are something you typically don't email, or you shouldn't. How do students get their SSIDs? Log in.
Yeah, that can be done in a variety of ways. Like I said, there are some districts that have setups that they can share personally identifiable information of the student. I'm not sure if, like Skyward, if there is either the SSID is in Skyward, or if like the individual student reports from a summative assessment in previous years, if those are posted into password-enabled location that a family can go, those also have the student's SSID. Yeah, and there's such a variety of ways that schools and families are communicating in this way, just to leverage some of those where it's an individual conversation. So for example, I get a lot of emails from my son's school district that are generic, that are meant for everybody. Those are not appropriate ways to share student SSIDs, because those are specific pieces of information. So if this is something that is a secure system that a district has, they can leverage that. If this is something that comes down all the way at the other end of the spectrum, an individual phone call to the family. Say, hey, here's your child's SSID. They're going to need this for an activity that they're doing. Individual conferences, anything along those spectrum. Just the idea that we want to make sure that individual families only get the SSIDs for their students, that we're not releasing other students' personal identifying information, because that is a FERPA violation.
Okay, that's great. The hill's getting steeper for me right now. I'm thinking, how am I going to do this in my district? I have to figure out all these ways to communicate securely.
Yeah.
Those of you out there in the Q&A world, the attendees, if you have ideas, please put them in. Password protected emails, maybe. I don't know. So anyway, so Airways is gone.
Mm-hmm.
We loved Airways. None of us here really know probably about the SRS, what's known as the Smarter Reporting System.
Right.
So
New this year.
Yeah,
Yep.
It's new this year. So many of us are new to this, and let's just say that a school, elects one person to manage the interim test administration. All students in the school take the test under that one TA, that central master TA. What steps would that person need to take to make sure that that the teachers at their school would be able to view the responses of their own students? So, those teachers are the ones that need to grade it. They need to look over it. They need to digest the students.
Sure. Yeah, because with this new system hosted by Smarter Balance, the Smarter Reporting System, in order for an individual teacher to see the students, their own students' results, requires that a school or district coordinator set up a student group within the Smarter Reporting System. And this is work that is separate from the rostering that is done in TIDE, of rostering students to that particular teacher. So there is another activity that needs to happen in order for teachers to be able to see their individual student results. Now, the process to do that is described within a user guide that's within the Smarter Reporting System, but only within this week, actually, and it was very timely. See if I can get this link here to post into the chat. We have developed kind of an introduction document that gets at these kind of first things first activities that an educator would need to do in order to get to results or see results. And one of those tasks is for the school coordinator to go in and create a student group for the individual teacher so that they can see interim results within the Smarter Reporting System. So that is,
right.
I think it's on page 8 of that particular document. It says, hey, here's what the school coordinator is going to need to do, because they have access, again, to all of the students within their school. And now what they're going to do is they're going to say, these students go to this teacher, and in that way, then the teacher would be able to see the individual results in the Smarter Reporting System.
Great. Here's a question that came up that's connected to that. I tried to start a session just to kind of see what it was different, to start my own interim session. And it gave me this option, district school conversation, but the default was classroom.
Right.
Can you talk about when you would use one versus the other?
Sure. So classroom use we're envisioning as kind of those non-standardized administrations. So if it could be a standardized administration as well, but really we think, and we have this as the default because we think that this is the greatest benefit in any information, is to say, this is information designed for the classroom teacher to make instructional decisions for the students that they have. Whereas other assessment results or other information that would be evaluated at, say, a school or the district level are usually more intended for system decisions or for programmatic decisions, really, that don't get down to, okay, what does an individual group of students or an individual student need in a learning based on that information. So what we're saying there is, like, classroom use can be anything. It can be a non-standardized, you pull up the interim and the students maybe are working in partners or in a small group to go through an interim step by step, and then the information gets into smarter reporting system. And the teacher would know that because they were the ones that maybe facilitated that approach to using an interim. But a school administrator or district administrator may not know that and might think that what they're seeing in the smarter reporting system is a more standardized administration. And so that's what I think we're trying to message with the district and school conversations is if you want to use interims for those kind of programmatic kind of information, then it is probably best that those administrations be done in a standardized way. But that is kind of the other way that we might be able to use interim assessments, but it's not, we think, the primary or the default way, which is really back into the classroom and get them information for instructional decisions.
Okay, thanks, Anton. Question about security expectations in OSPI.
Yes.
What security expectations do you have? Is there a guidance? I mean, I know you have that document. Is all the guidance we need to know about security expectations in there, or is there anything else you'd like to share?
It's very general. It's very brief in that document. We didn't want to overwhelm in that place, but I think really it's about if we can maintain the student-facing and the teacher-facing aspect of those interims, and just understanding that other educators, either in the school, the district, or other districts, are using interims in a broad way, and some of them may want to administer them in a standardized way. And if a student has had access to the items previous to any standardized administration, then that could potentially influence the results, and the results wouldn't necessarily be as standardized as one might think. So I think, like I said, we have not been super strict about this, like the semi-secure nature. Really, I think the pieces that we're saying is they cannot be posted publicly. Can't put, like you said, the Word document. If you got a Word document of the interims, don't put those on a Google, Google Classroom or a public district website, something like that, because then that basically releases those items, and the use that a classroom teacher might have kind of can be undercut.
Great. Here's an interesting question that came in. If you use the interim, like do your screen share of an interim, use the AVA, and you're sharing it on a Zoom, and you have that option to hit the record button so that you can kind of archive your lesson and students who are not there can see it. How does that sit with you as far as security goes?
Yeah. I think it really depends on where that recording is going. I think a lot of this is like, if it's recording to the cloud, then it's just like, where is that going? What's the recording piece? And if you do put something up there, if you do have a recording and you place it for students to see later, just think about at what point are you going to take that down? At what point are you going to say, okay, this is not something that is continually accessible to the student or to other students.
So it's okay to do as long as it's kind of in the domain of just accessible by students.
Right.
And then
right.
we may have a deadline, a shelf life for it. So, yeah.
Sure. Yeah, it kind of keeps in that. And it's weird. Yeah, you're right. It's just a weird idea, and keep coming back to using the word classroom, but that's become very fluid and very flexible in terms of how are students engaging with their teachers, and the ways in which they're doing that in some cases are very secure. They have an individual student login, or the teacher has something that they can really well manage who has access to what's in there. And in other cases, it's a go to this website and do this other thing, and it's not necessarily secure. So just thinking about the security of those in a similar way that you would, like if you had the paper packets of the classroom and using them within a school facility, you wouldn't want those leaving the school facility because then it's what controls do we have over where those things go?
Yeah, I think sometimes, yeah, another question's come up, saying, hey, it's kind of hard to really be super secure about this because we don't know what the kids are doing at home. They could be like taking video of their screen and sharing it with friends, and we can try our best, but it's difficult the Ziploc bag is going to leak at some point, and probably not leak in a way that's really going to affect any of us, but it is hard to work in a vacuum with some of this because we're digital now and people can record their own session or their own screen or whatever. But that was kind of a security follow-up question that came up is,
Yeah, I saw that kind of got upvoted up to the top about speak a little bit more about security. And it is that student and teacher facing, and there's a lot of flexibility for educators to use interims with students, and because that's really the environment. And like I said, there's a little that's gotten a little amorphous with students being remote. But yeah, as soon as you're sending packets home, as soon as you're doing recordings, then it's kind of like, well, we're pushing on those boundaries.
Yeah. So here's a question for you. Some districts are new to interim assessments or IBs in particular. There's a lot of them.
Yeah.
Does OSPI have any guidance around suggestions of a kind of a chronological order, suggested chronological order of the interim assessments? And if not, maybe is there any kind of data that tells us kind of which ones are more used than others, which ones seem to be more helpful for folks than others?
No, there's not really. There isn't a chronological order that we recommend because each one is a little piece of content. I think about the math interims, for example. They're pretty specific to parts of the standards that at the local level might be addressed at different times throughout the year. So really, it's kind of when might an interim assessment for math in particular, when might it fit with the scope and sequence of the content that's being taught. For English language arts, we're focused on kind of the organization, again, focused around the standards, but may not have a unit specifically on, say, editing, which is one of the interims, or on brief rights, to say, okay, we're teaching a unit on brief rights, so we're going to use this interim. So no, we don't have a chronological piece because really what we want to kind of help educators understand is that they can use those whenever they want, whenever it fits in with the work that they're doing. It should have some connection to instruction that is going on at the time. I think that's going to be the most beneficial. So that idea of how do you get that information? How do you know where I might choose to have an interim? And that comes back to the assessment viewing application and being able to kind of look into and see all of the questions on an interim and have conversations about either individual questions and say, oh, this question fits perfectly with this lesson. Let's take a look. Let's use this in a non-standardized way. Or this interim in general would fit well at this point in the sequence of instruction.
Great.
Making those decisions.
Here's a question that came in. I think some people are thinking they know Airways. Some people love Airways. I think most teachers do. Are teachers going to be doing hand scoring through this new SRS system?
Yeah, and that kind of gets into your previous question about which interims are used most often. Because yes, hand scoring is still a requirement and would be done through the teacher hand scoring system. This is a system that we had a few years back, kind of brought this back because there isn't a hand scoring system within the Smarter Reporting system. That's just a data presentation. There's no scoring feature in there.
And
so
I'm sorry, Anton. Continue.
Okay, I was just gonna say we're using the teacher hand scoring system again to score open-ended interim questions. And to that point about popular, or which interims are being used more often, we do find that those interims that require hand scoring typically are used less frequently, or less in a standardized way than those that are machine scored, those that are automatically scored and just generate a score. So, because yeah,
in my mind, that's unfortunate because the hand scoring gives teacher insight. It's a training for the teacher. It gives them insight.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
Like what they need to be looking for, what skills they need to be building.
Mm-hmm. Well, and those materials,
what's that?
yeah, all the materials for hand scoring are available to educators, and they in within Tide. So we have a teacher hand scoring materials section in Tide. You can look at those, and I think alluded to talking about rubrics and exemplars and exploring those. They can also not only be good professional development for educators in terms of what are the ways that a summative assessment scores an item. And this is not necessarily what educators should only be looking for in classroom work and in classroom, say, writing or student thinking, but just, what's a way that they might be assessed on the summative assessment. So the teachers know what those ways are, and then sharing those with the students as well, and kind of in that way can unpack a little bit of those.
And just to clarify, Anton, so I think some of the folks out there just want this clarification. The rostering that goes on in Tide is not connected with how teachers view their students' results in the SRS. In the SRS, you have to assign, after the student takes the test, completes it, you have to assign that test to a teacher.
Yeah, you have to assign the student to a teacher in SRS, and that is an independent task from any rostering that's done in Tide.
Right. And then just for me, this is kind of a question that I tried to figure out last year, and I don't think I ever figured out how to do it, but there's no way for a district to look and see currently like what all interim assessment kids are doing across the district, right?
Yeah, there actually is. Within Tide, there is a test completion report that is available, and district users can look at the districts and get an Excel export from Tide under the test completion report that shows which interims are being used. I believe it can be you can disaggregate by individual schools and say, okay, this school is giving this interim, so districts can track at the district level interims. Now, this only tracks interims that are being given through the
platform,
that are being given with a test session and a teacher TA. It doesn't track anything like about a teacher using AVA or using one having students working in groups. So those non-standardized ways. It only does track kind of the standardized administration of the interims, but it's a similar report I think that districts might use during the summative testing to say, where are we on getting our kids into that summative test.
Yeah. I think I looked at like a previous year and I got a lot of data on it, but then when I looked at the current year, it seems like I didn't get as much data for the student level, like maybe trying to find some like performance data somewhere, and I was like, forget it. Anyway, just confirm students can be assigned more than one teacher in the SRS.
Yes, you can assign a student to multiple teachers.
Great. Well, it's kind of getting to be a little bit late here. I'm going to look at these. Are there any questions that I didn't ask that you're like, why didn't Brian ask that question? Because while you think about that, I'm going to look at these questions to make sure that I try to address most people's questions. If you were me, like, what question would you have asked? Like, what have you been?
No, I really appreciate it. I think the theme of the questions was pretty clear in terms of we want to know about the logistics. We want to know about the technical aspects of how do we get access to it. What are the yes and no's of how to do an interim assessment remotely, and I can appreciate that, but just want to kind of reinforce this idea of getting the information back to the teachers. Really, that was the intent and the design for the interims, and to help teachers monitor students and their learning and choosing the right assessments at the right time. There's a lot of flexibility to do that based on what's going on instructionally, what are the instructional needs, what's the informational needs from the teacher in terms of um, being able to make some informational decisions. So, in previous years, you might have used an interim and said, oh, well, the whole school is going to give this interim on this date so that we can have a data point for, X, Y, Z reason. That isn't a supported use of the interims in terms of some kind of accountability measure. It's not something that the interims are designed to do. And so if that's kind of a driver on some of these questions, then it's kind of rethinking and saying, okay, how do we not only think about the logistics of doing this, but also that next step of, now that we have this information, how are we going to get it back to the classroom teacher? What decisions, how are we going to help them make some instructional decisions based on the information that they have, and help target individual student learning needs.
Great. Well, it's 2:13. We have about 5 minutes. I'll just wrap it up with one more question. So how's your first date with Cambium going on? What are they like compared to AIR? Like in terms of support, new features, like how has it been?
It has been good because primarily it's been the same staff that we've been working with over the last several years. So it was a rebranding, essentially. It was a AIR assessments. That component of the AIR portfolio was purchased by Cambium, and they were, I don't want to say wise enough, but they were allowing enough to have a lot of the same staff continue to work with us. So we've kept the good relations that we had with the folks at AIR and continued working with them as under the Cambium name.
Cool. A few more questions coming in. I want to get those asked while we have time. Will we be able to see the use of the IABs through the results like they used to be shown in the online reporting system?
So we think that the reporting, the smarter reporting system has a lot of great pieces of information. A lot of it is very similar to what you would see in when interim results were in on the online reporting system and when they were in Airways. You can see some overall performance levels for interims. You can see individual student responses. So you can dig down to individual, how do the students in a particular class perform on each item in the interim. You can see individual student responses. And then there are some added features that were not available in Airways or in the online reporting system, such as for those multiple choice or multiple select questions, there is what's called a distractor or key analysis report, which basically says, okay, I've got 4 options. And in the previous system, all I knew is whether or not the student got the right answer or they got something else. So really kind of lumped through, got 4 options and lumped it into, it was either right or it was one of the 3 things that was wrong. And I didn't know which one of those 3 was wrong unless I looked at the student result and the student response. And I had to go individual student by individual student to say, student A chose B and student, the next student chose C and the next student chose D. And, I didn't do that manually for every single student. Well, now what they have a report within the smarter reporting system is a single report that shows what each student chose for every single item and said, here is the percent of students that chose the correct answer. Here's the percent that chose this incorrect answer, option B. So you can very clearly get a very quick snapshot and say, oh, well, I see 20% of my kids are getting the right answer, and the other 80% are picking incorrect option D. What is it about option D? What instructional decision might that help me make in terms of helping those students who are picking that incorrect option? And now what percent of them are picking that.
Right. So is that better than Airways then, in your mind? Is that
It's an added feature. It's something that folks were asking for from Airways that we just wasn't able to present. And the smarter reporting system does have that as a
great added feature. It's like heated side mirrors. It's like, hey, why not? If a teacher's using the interim comprehensive assessment, oh my gosh, I can't imagine anybody using the interim comprehensive assessment. But God bless the heart of the person that wants to do this. All right. And
Mhm.
selected classroom, they selected classroom instead of school district. Does it even matter? Can they still retrieve the student score on the ELA interim comprehensive assessment
Yeah.
area? Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't
Yeah.
really
In the
matter.
spring,
It's inconsequential which they select.
right. In the spring, we did limit it. In the spring, we said, no, we're not going to make interim comprehensives, and we're not going to make performance tasks available to administer to students remotely because we felt that there were other, other more pressing things. But at the beginning now of the fall, that we have we've opened it up for anything. So yes, a student could take an interim comprehensive assessment.
Great. And the reason why I rolled my eyes at the interim comprehensive assessment is because if the student doesn't finish one part of it, they don't get a score for any of it. It's like that was my experience. It's like they got to finish everything. So it's not like that. That's why it's pretty tough.
Well, yeah, and it's still the same thing. They have to finish both components of that, and the scoring has to be done. The hand scoring has to be done by local educators.
Yeah, it locks them in hand scoring, which is a good thing, but it's it's a commitment. So somebody said, hey, why do we need to roster and tide if we can create teacher groups in the SRS in order to see the scores? I think I can answer that. Tide is for the summative. So you want to see scores in the summative, that's when you roster and tide, right? And also for creating test tickets and all that kind of thing.
Test tickets. If you want test tickets, you need to do the rostering. That is true. The rostering. Yeah, what other features?
Out by teacher or whatever, it's easier.
Yeah.
But the SRS rostering in there really is kind of for just so teachers can see the results of their own kids on the interims.
Yeah.
The item level ones. Yeah, I think that's it. This Q&A thing it's cool, but people hit the thumbs up and then the question disappears. It goes floating up and it sorts them by whoever has the more thumbs up. So I think I see a good question, but then it just disappears and it goes now. But at any rate, Antone, it has been a pleasure to have you on with us, and we hope you come back to answer some more great questions about assessments. And just thanks so much for joining us. And what we're going to do is we're going to give the Q&As that came up in here. If you guys, the attendees out there, if you want to put more questions in the Q&A area, we'll leave this open for a few minutes. We're going to give these over to Antone and his team. And yeah, maybe they'll be nice and do a little Q&A for us. Maybe not. But there's a lot of stuff to do. I'm sure OSPI is really busy with stuff, but we'll give them all of your questions and considerations, and they'll be passed on. Okay. Great,
and Brian. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to come and share. And again, I want to let's see. I think we get just want to if I can share one last thing while folks are
sure.
Kind of looking at that. Are you seeing this, the contact information slide?
Yes.
Okay. So just there, as I said, the document that I kind of walked through is available to the district assessment coordinators through WAMs. So reaching out to those folks or going in there yourself as you are the DAX to get that document. And then as I listed some contact information for myself, for Serena O'Neill, and for Maya Wilson. So as there are questions around just general questions or math or ELA specific questions, please feel free to reach out to any of us as you would like.
That's great. Well, Antone, you're kind of a superstar, so everybody knows how to get in touch with you. Serena and Maha, don't really know them as well, but it's nice to know that they're definitely on call. Great. I'm going to just share with you the thank you for attending this remote learning panel series. You guys know that all the stuff that Antone shared with you in the session will be available in the WIRA area. They put all the PowerPoints and everything in there, so you'll have all that. Great. Thank you so much. And we are timing this session out.